And the world then is divided, and I'm giving you kind of the Salafia interpretation. So just understand that I'm not telling you what every Muslim thinks, but this is the Salafia interpretation. That the Islamic world is the Dar al-Islam, the house of Islam, or the house of submission, meaning submission to God's will. Right? And it's the place where God's will reigns. So it's a place of peace, it's a place of justice, it's a place where people get along. It's the ideal society that God has created on earth, right? The outside is called the Dar al-Harb. I don't know, can we have the lights dimmed a little bit?
We can, but it'll knock them all down.
Huh?
We'll lose all the lights.
Oh, no. Sorry about that. Apparently, if you turn, they're on or off, huh? The Dar al-Harb really means the place of war, but it also means the place where disorder reigns, where there's injustice, where there's violence, where God's word hasn't sort of taken hold yet. Now, when it's Dar al-Harb, you could mean it's warfare within that society because it's a wild society, but it can also mean the place that you have to war against to bring in God's word. And, I guess there isn't. And so for the Salafia, the Dar al-Harb is also where you're allowed to fight, right? You're really not supposed to battle other Muslims. They do, and I'll get back to that, but there is this idea of the house of Islam, of God's word, peace, justice, and all that, and the outside world, which is degenerate, violent, and needs Islam in order to bring in peace. So I just want you to have that sort of dichotomy in mind as we go forward. I'm going to start my story with the fall of the Abbasid Empire. The Abbasid Empire began around 750 or thereabouts and lasted till about 1250. The Abbasids is the great empire of the Muslim world. When we think about the Golden Age and all of that, you're really thinking of the Abbasids. It's when Aladdin lived, right? So it was the world of magic carpets and wealth and beautiful gardens and poets and literature and mathematics and astronomy. This was really the high point of the of Muslim civilization. It got conquered for a lot of reasons. Part of it was internal, but part of it was these waves of people who came through. They came through Europe as well, what we would call the Golden Hordes, that swept through Hungary and Poland. The southern part of that was the Turks and Genghis Khan. And they swept in, I have my magic pen, kind of from this direction, and gradually just overwhelmed the Abbasid Empire. What I say is there in 1220 they took Samarkand and Bukhara. By mid-1200s they had taken Russia and Central Europe. That's what we call the Golden Hordes. Northern Iran and the Caucasus. And in 1258, under Hulagu Khan, they invaded Baghdad and put an end to the glorious Abbasid Empire. And there's Baghdad right there. Baghdad was the capital of the Abbasid Empire. The previous empire, the capital had been in Damascus. Now it's in Baghdad. So Baghdad has this image of itself, and that's part of the background of this whole issue we're in, that Baghdad sees itself as the great capital at the time that the Islamic Empire was really thriving. It fell in 1258. And the Abbasid Empire sort of lived long for a while, but it was essentially over by then. Eventually behind Genghis Khan and his followers were the Turks, there were the Seljuk Turks, and then the Ottoman Turks, and eventually the Ottoman Turks took over the whole empire, and to rule it, the Ottomans, who were pagans, converted to Islam, and the Ottoman Empire, as you know, lasted down through World War I, when it was disassembled by the British. The Arabs never fully thought the Turks were really Muslims, and there's still tension between Turkey and the Muslim world. It kind of goes back and forth. But what you have to have in mind at this point is this disaster. It's like, for us, the fall of Rome, the eternal city that falls to these German hordes, right? So the Abbasid Empire, with great world civilization, where God's word reigned, fell to a bunch of wild, uncivilized Turks in 1258. And the question on everybody's mind, or certainly every Abbasid's mind, was, why did this happen? How could our civilization, as glorious as it was, and Muslim, and under God's rule and under God's protection, how could this fall, and what happened? And the person who came up with the answer, or I should say an answer, was this Ibn Taymiyyah I talked about earlier. Okay, so let me come back to Ibn Taymiyyah. Taqi ad-Din Ibn Taymiyyah, which is about 1/10 of his name. It goes on and on and on. You can see he was born in 1263, which was 5 years or so after the fall of Baghdad. So he grows up right after this has happened. And he said a couple of things. First, he wanted to revive Islam's true adherence to Tawhid. And let me explain this, because this has a lot of ramifications. Tawhid means unity. It's related to Hebrew Yachad or Echad, Tawhid, right? You can hear the similarity. What it originally meant was the unity of God. This was probably a way of telling early Muslims they weren't Trinitarian, right? They weren't Christian. There's one God, and that God's creation has a sort of coherence and unity to it. That's what Tawhid meant. Okay, and he thinks that part of the problem is that Muslims in the Abbasids had given up this unity and needed to go back. So he's calling for a more pure monotheism. Now keep this in mind, because the Salafi movement today has a different interpretation, which is, I think, really, really important. Now, there are certain people he's against, and one of them are the Sufis. So let me say just a little bit about the Sufis. The Sufis are a spiritual sect within Islam, right? If we have a parallel in Judaism, maybe it would be Hasidism or something. The Kabbalah a little bit. They're not so much mystic as spiritual. But they do a lot of things that kind of look and feel like Hinduism. They have kind of yogas, they have mantras. You know, some of the more, what am I going to say, spectacular Sufis, like the whirling dervishes, spin around and get themselves into a trance. There's a lot of thought that the Sufis really are under a lot of Hindu influence, and it looks right. They also go to the tombs of past masters, and they have their special holidays and so forth. But insofar as they revere their masters of their various sects, and they go to their graves, and they pray and so forth, for Ibn Taymiyyah, this was a violation of Tawhid. Or they have angels, or you make ascent to heaven. This to him is kind of crossing over into polytheism, right? So he does not like the Sufis. The Shias are another problem for him. And you can figure by the process of elimination he must be a Sunni. Right. Because Shia, very good, Shias put tremendous emphasis on their imams. A Shia imam, and if you have in Shia, a super imam is called an ayatollah, so you know what I'm talking about, is a replacement of Muhammad, almost literally, not quite, but is a revered figure, like a Rebbe, right? And there's a sort of worship that can happen to imams in Shia Islam and to ayatollahs. You can see this in Iran. And for him, this was also a problem. So you can see he's a very strict, puritanical, Unitarian Sunni, and doesn't like all this variety going on in the Muslim world.